Some stories begin with a scream. The ones you never forget begin with silence. The wind swept across the Wyoming high country with the slow, mournful voice of winter itself, carrying fine crystals of snow that shimmered beneath a pale afternoon sky. Endless white stretched over the mountains, soft enough to look peaceful, cold enough to erase every trace of life. Olivia Carter had covered disasters, floods, and wildfires during her 7 years as an investigative reporter, but she had never known silence like this. It wasn't comforting. It felt as though the mountain was holding its breath. Her SUV could go no farther after the narrow forest road disappeared beneath nearly 3 feet of fresh snow, forcing her to continue on foot with nothing but her camera, a backpack, and the uneasy feeling that she wasn't entirely alone. She had come chasing a rumor from a retired park ranger who claimed strange tracks had appeared after the blizzard. Not wolf tracks, not bear tracks, but the disciplined pattern of military boots accompanied by 2 large dogs. No search teams had reported anyone missing, yet something about the old ranger's trembling voice refused to leave her thoughts. Every few yards she paused, listening beyond the whispering pines. Only the wind answered. Then she saw them. At first it looked like nothing more than a dark stain interrupting the endless blanket of white. As she climbed the final ridge, the shape slowly emerged into something unmistakably human. A man lay partially buried beneath drifting snow, his wrists bound behind him with weathered climbing rope, his winter jacket nearly hidden beneath layers of ice crystals. Nearby rested 2 German shepherds, their thick sable coats frosted white until they almost blended into the landscape. None of them moved. Olivia froze. Her pulse pounded louder than the wind as she hurried forward, boots sinking deep into the powder. The man's face was pale beneath several days of beard growth, his features weathered but unmistakably disciplined, the kind of face shaped by years of impossible decisions. A dented metal trident pin remained fastened to the chest of his insulated jacket. Even half concealed beneath snow, she recognized it immediately. Navy SEAL. She swallowed hard, fumbling for her satellite phone with trembling fingers. The signal flickered weakly. She tried again. Nothing. The mountain seemed determined to keep it secret. She knelt beside the nearest dog, whispering softly, although she knew there would be no answer. Frost clung to the animal's eyelashes. Its body remained perfectly still. The second shepherd rested closer to the man's shoulder, positioned almost protectively despite the unforgiving cold. Olivia lowered her head, grief settling into her chest before she even realized it. She reached toward the man's neck, hoping against reason to find the faintest pulse. Nothing she could feel through her frozen gloves gave her hope. A gust of wind rolled over the ridge, lifting loose snow into the air like drifting ashes. She closed her eyes for only a heartbeat. Then she heard it. Not a bark, not a whine, a slow, ragged breath. Her eyes snapped open just as one German shepherd's ear twitched beneath the snow. Then, with impossible determination, the dog's amber eye opened and fixed itself on hers. The German shepherd did not try to stand. He did not bark or growl. He simply watched Olivia Carter with tired amber eyes that still held the quiet focus of a soldier refusing to surrender. A thin cloud of frost drifted from his muzzle as another slow breath escaped into the frozen air. Relief surged through Olivia so suddenly that her own knees weakened. "Easy, boy," she whispered, removing one glove before gently brushing the snow away from his face. His ears flicked once. Then his gaze shifted toward the motionless man lying beside him. It was not fear she saw. It was purpose. The dog was trying to tell her something. Olivia crawled through the snow until she reached the bound Navy SEAL once more. This time she leaned closer, placing 2 fingers against the side of his neck beneath the collar of his insulated jacket. At first, there was nothing except the sting of bitter wind against her skin. Then, almost too faint to believe, she felt the slightest rhythm beneath her fingertips. Weak, slow, but undeniably alive. She closed her eyes for a brief second, whispering a quiet prayer she had not spoken since childhood. "You are still here." She pulled her satellite phone from her jacket again and climbed onto a nearby boulder, raising the antenna toward the gray sky. Static crackled. The signal faded. She turned another direction. One thin bar appeared before vanishing once again. The mountain refused every attempt. Snowflakes drifted steadily around her, covering fresh footprints almost as quickly as they were made. She knew daylight would disappear within 2 hours. If she could not find help, no one would survive another night. As she hurried back, the second German Shepherd remained completely still beside Ethan Hayes, his thick coat buried beneath layers of snow. Olivia touched the larger dog's shoulder gently, hoping for any sign of life, but he did not respond. The first Shepherd watched every movement she made, blinking slowly as though conserving every ounce of strength. Around his neck hung a worn leather collar carrying a scratched brass tag. Rex. She read the name softly, and one ear twitched again. "All right, Rex," she murmured. "Help me understand." Rex struggled to lift his head only a few inches before collapsing back into the snow. Instead of looking at Olivia, he stared toward a line of towering pine trees beyond the ridge. His nose lifted into the wind. Then he looked back at Ethan, then toward the forest again. Olivia followed his gaze but saw nothing except drifting snow and dark evergreens swaying beneath heavy ice. Yet the expression in Rex's eyes was unmistakable. He was asking her to look. Years of interviewing detectives had taught Olivia one lesson she trusted above all others. When every fact made no sense, follow the witness who had nothing to gain by lying. She clipped her emergency whistle onto Ethan's jacket where rescuers could spot him if they arrived first, wrapped an extra thermal blanket over both men and dogs, then rose slowly to her feet. Rex watched her carefully until she finally nodded. "Show me." The exhausted German Shepherd gathered what little strength remained, pushed his front paws beneath him, and with heartbreaking determination managed to stand. His legs trembled violently, yet after one glance back at Ethan Hayes, he turned toward the silent forest and took the first unsteady step through the untouched snow. Rex limped forward without looking back, leaving a staggered line of paw prints across the untouched snow, while Olivia Carter followed several yards behind, careful not to lose sight of him in the growing wind. Every few steps the German Shepherd paused, his breathing shallow, turning just enough to make certain she was still there before continuing into the pines. The forest swallowed sound almost completely. Snow rested heavily on towering evergreens, their branches bending beneath the weight, releasing soft showers of white whenever the breeze shifted. The scent of frozen pine and damp earth lingered beneath the clean mountain air, and somewhere far away a raven called only once before silence returned. Olivia tightened the straps of her backpack and pressed onward. She no longer questioned why she was following an exhausted dog into an empty wilderness. She simply trusted that whatever had kept Rex alive this long had not been chance. Nearly 300 yards from the ridge, the dog slowed beside an old game trail, almost invisible beneath the fresh snowfall. He lowered his nose, sniffed carefully, then continued until he stopped beside a weathered pine whose trunk bore a fresh scrape nearly 6 feet above the ground. Olivia brushed away loose snow with her glove. The bark had been marked recently, revealing pale wood beneath the dark outer layer. Below it she discovered something half buried in the drift. It was a torn strip of olive green fabric caught beneath a fallen branch. She recognized the material immediately. Military-grade winter clothing. She looked farther ahead. More signs appeared once she knew where to search. A shallow depression where someone had knelt. A broken twig that still showed green beneath the frost. Boot impressions almost erased by the storm, but marching steadily toward the ridge where Ethan lay. Someone had been here before the blizzard buried nearly everything. Rex gave a low whine and nudged another mound of snow with his nose. Olivia hurried over, kneeling beside him until her fingers struck cold metal beneath the powder. Together they uncovered a waterproof field notebook no larger than her hand. Its protective cover had preserved the pages despite the storm. She opened it carefully. Most pages contained maps and handwritten coordinates, but one folded sheet had been tucked inside separately. Across the top, written in bold block letters, were only 3 words. "If found alive." Olivia's heartbeat quickened. Beneath the heading was a single sentence. "Do not trust the first rescue team unless they know the names of both dogs." She stared at the page as the wind sighed through the trees. Rex watched her quietly, his amber eyes never leaving her face. He already knew what the note meant. Whoever had left Ethan bound in the snow had expected someone else to return. Olivia slowly folded the paper and slipped it safely inside her jacket. She glanced back toward the distant ridge, now hidden behind falling snow, where Ethan Hayes and the second German shepherd still waited beneath the gathering storm. The daylight had grown noticeably weaker, and the clouds overhead darkened into heavy gray layers that promised another snowfall before sunset. Rex suddenly lifted his ears. He was listening. A faint sound drifted through the mountains, almost too distant to recognize. It was not thunder. It was the low, rhythmic hum of an engine somewhere beyond the trees. Rex did not wag his tail. Instead, every muscle in his weary body stiffened, and for the first time since Olivia had found him, the faithful German shepherd quietly stepped in front of her as though shielding her from something neither of them could yet see. The distant engine rose and faded with the restless wind, never growing close enough to identify, yet never disappearing long enough to be forgotten. Olivia Carter instinctively lowered her posture behind a snow-covered boulder while Rex remained perfectly still, his amber eyes fixed toward the narrow valley below. The German shepherd was no longer searching. He was listening with the quiet discipline of a partner who had spent years reading dangers invisible to everyone else. Snowflakes drifted steadily between the towering pines, soft enough to look harmless, yet each passing minute added another thin layer across the fading tracks. Olivia carefully reached into her jacket and unfolded the weatherproof note once more. Her eyes lingered on the warning. Do not trust the first rescue team unless they know the names of both dogs. She whispered the names almost unconsciously. Rex and... Her voice trailed away. She suddenly realized she had never learned the second dog's name. The realization settled heavily in her chest. Ethan Hayes had expected someone to ask. Someone worthy of trust would already know the answer. She slipped the paper away just as Rex quietly turned and began moving back toward the ridge. His pace was even slower now. Every few yards his front legs trembled beneath exhaustion, but determination carried him forward. Olivia stayed beside him this time, refusing to let him struggle alone. The mountain seemed darker than before. Thick gray clouds rolled over the peaks, swallowing what remained of the afternoon sun until the entire landscape glowed with the pale blue light that always came before another storm. By the time they reached Ethan again, fresh snow had already begun covering the thermal blanket she had wrapped around him. She quickly brushed it away, checking his pulse once more. Still weak. Still there. Hope, she realized, sometimes survived by the smallest margins. Her eyes shifted toward the second German shepherd. Unlike Rex, the larger dog had not moved at all since she first found him. His body remained curled close against Ethan as though refusing to surrender the warmth they still shared. Olivia gently cleared the snow from the dog's broad shoulders and discovered another leather collar hidden beneath the frost. She brushed away the ice covering the brass tag until engraved letters slowly appeared. Ghost. The name escaped her lips in almost a whisper. At that exact moment, Rex lifted his head. His tired tail tapped the snow once. Then, to Olivia's astonishment, Ghost released a long, quiet breath that formed a cloud of white against the frozen air. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably alive. Tears filled Olivia's eyes before she even realized she was crying. 2 lives, not one. She quickly removed another emergency blanket from her backpack, wrapping Ghost as carefully as she had wrapped Ethan. You have held on this long, she murmured softly. Please hold on a little longer. The mountain answered only with wind weaving through the pines. Then something else interrupted the silence. A single voice echoed faintly across the valley, too distant to understand. Human. Olivia stood immediately, every instinct sharpening at once. Another voice followed, carried briefly by the wind before disappearing again. Rex did not bark. He did not run toward the sound. Instead, he stepped directly beside Ethan Hayes and pressed his body protectively against the Navy SEAL while staring toward the unseen voices. Olivia remembered the warning inside the notebook. She looked from the approaching sounds to the faithful German shepherd who trusted his instincts more than appearances. Without speaking another word, she quietly slipped the folded note deeper into her jacket, knowing the next people to emerge from the snow might determine whether this miracle continued or ended where the mountain had intended it to. The voices drifted closer through the swirling snow, still too distant for Olivia Carter to distinguish words, only the steady rhythm of men calling to one another across the mountainside. She remained beside Ethan Hayes, one hand resting lightly on Rex's shoulder while Ghost lay wrapped beneath the thermal blanket, his breathing shallow but steady. Every instinct urged her to wave, to shout, to run toward help, yet the folded note inside her jacket felt heavier than the camera hanging from her neck. She remembered every letter. Do not trust the first rescue team unless they know the names of both dogs. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of gasoline and wet wool. Moments later, 3 figures emerged between the snow-covered pines, wearing bright orange winter jackets marked with mountain rescue patches. Their faces were hidden beneath goggles and frost-covered hoods. Relief flooded Olivia's chest despite herself. One of the rescuers lifted a gloved hand. "We saw your emergency marker," he called warmly. "Everyone all right over there?" Olivia stood but did not answer immediately. Rex remained seated beside Ethan without making a sound. His ears were forward, his eyes calm but intensely focused on the approaching strangers. The lead rescuer stopped several yards away, carefully studying the scene before stepping closer. "Looks like you found survivors," he said. "We need to move quickly before the next storm hits." Olivia took one slow breath. "Before you come any closer," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "can you tell me the names of these 2 dogs?" The 3 rescuers exchanged quick glances. The man nearest her frowned slightly. "I am sorry," he answered after a pause. "We were only told there was a missing service member with military dogs. We do not have their names." Olivia felt her heartbeat quicken. She glanced down at Rex. The German shepherd had not relaxed. His gaze remained fixed beyond the rescuers, toward the trail they had used to reach the ridge. Then something unexpected happened. A 4th voice echoed faintly through the trees behind them. "Hold your position," it shouted. Everyone turned. Another group was climbing the slope from a different direction. They wore darker winter uniforms with county search and rescue insignias across their jackets, accompanied by a deputy carrying emergency medical equipment. Their leader, a broad-shouldered woman in her 40s, reached the ridge breathing heavily before stopping the instant she saw the dogs. Her face softened. "Rex," she called gently. "Ghost. Easy now. We finally found you." Rex's posture changed immediately. His tense shoulders relaxed, and although exhaustion prevented him from standing quickly, his tail swept weakly across the snow. The woman knelt several feet away without rushing him. "Good boy," she whispered. "You stayed with Ethan just like you always do." Olivia slowly released the breath she had been holding. The warning had been real. The woman introduced herself as Captain Laura Bennett from the County Search and Rescue Command before turning her attention to Ethan Hayes with calm professionalism. Medical blankets appeared. Oxygen equipment was unpacked. The deputy carefully checked Ethan's pulse while another rescuer examined Ghost without disturbing him. No one hurried. No one spoke loudly. It felt less like an operation and more like people honoring a promise. As Olivia stepped aside, Captain Bennett looked at the weathered brass collars resting against both German shepherds and smiled quietly. "These 2 have saved more lives than most people ever will," she said. Rex slowly closed his tired eyes for the first time since Olivia had found him, as though he finally believed his long watch was over. The rescue team worked with the quiet confidence that only years of experience could teach, speaking in calm voices that blended with the whisper of the falling snow. Captain Laura Bennett directed each movement with measured precision, while 2 medics carefully wrapped Ethan Hayes inside a heated rescue cocoon before securing him onto a lightweight sled designed for mountain evacuations. Every buckle was checked twice. Every blanket was tucked tightly against the relentless cold. One medic gently loosened the weathered rope around Ethan's wrists, taking care not to disturb his fragile condition, while another adjusted a portable oxygen mask over his face. For the first time since Olivia Carter had found him, Ethan released a deeper breath, faint but unmistakably stronger than before. Nearby, Ghost slowly opened his eyes as warm blankets surrounded him. His breathing remained shallow, yet the gentle rise and fall of his chest drew quiet smiles from the veterinary technician who had arrived with the 2nd Rescue Unit. She carefully examined his paws, ears, and eyes before softly stroking the thick fur along his neck. "You are tougher than you look, old friend," she whispered. Ghost answered only by turning his tired gaze toward Ethan. Even now, every instinct remained fixed on the man he had protected. Rex refused to leave Ethan's side while the rescuers prepared to move. Despite trembling with exhaustion, he stood beside the rescue sled, watching every hand that touched his partner. Captain Bennett crouched beside him and rested a gloved hand against his shoulder. "You can walk with us," she said gently. "You have earned that much." Rex blinked slowly, almost as though he understood every word. The long journey down the mountain began just as daylight surrendered to the blue shadows of evening. Snow continued falling in quiet waves, muffling every sound except the steady crunch of boots and the soft glide of the rescue sled across fresh powder. Olivia followed close behind, clutching her camera beneath her coat. She had recorded almost nothing since finding Ethan. Somehow pointing a lens at this moment had felt wrong. Some stories demanded witnesses before they deserved headlines. As the convoy descended through the forest, the towering pines gradually opened into a frozen service road where emergency vehicles waited with flashing amber lights that glowed warmly against the white landscape. Heated ambulances stood ready with engines humming softly in the growing darkness. The instant the sled reached the road, physicians moved forward without haste, transferring Ethan into the waiting ambulance while continuing warmed intravenous fluids and monitoring his heartbeat. Ghost was carefully lifted onto a padded stretcher beside him. Rex hesitated at the open ambulance door, his ears lowered as attendants prepared to close it. Before anyone could guide him away, Ethan's fingers moved almost imperceptibly beneath the blankets. It was no more than the smallest twitch, barely enough to bend one gloved hand. Yet Rex saw it instantly. His tail gave a single slow wag, and a quiet sound escaped his throat, somewhere between a sigh and a grateful whisper. Captain Bennett looked at the monitor inside the ambulance, then smiled toward Olivia. "That is the first voluntary movement since we reached him," she said softly. "Sometimes medicine begins the healing. Sometimes love arrives first." As the ambulance doors closed, snowflakes continued settling across the mountain behind them, gently covering every footprint that had led Olivia to Ethan, Rex, and Ghost, as though the wilderness itself had decided to keep the hardest part of their story forever hidden beneath the quiet grace of winter. Warm air replaced the bitter mountain wind as the ambulance rolled beneath the bright lights of St. Mary Regional Medical Center. The scent of antiseptic and fresh linen drifted through quiet hallways while nurses moved with practiced calm, their voices low enough to preserve the peace that every healing place deserved. Ethan Hayes disappeared behind the emergency room doors surrounded by physicians, respiratory specialists, and trauma nurses, each focused on the fragile rhythm that still carried him through the longest night of his life. Ghost was wheeled into the veterinary intensive care unit connected to the same medical campus, where military working dogs and search animals often received specialized treatment. Rex refused every invitation to rest. He planted himself outside the hospital entrance until Captain Laura Bennett finally spoke softly into his ear. "He is still inside, partner. You do not have to guard the parking lot." Only then did the faithful German shepherd slowly rise and follow her through the automatic doors. Olivia Carter watched from across the waiting room, a warm paper cup of untouched coffee resting between her hands. She had spent hours answering questions from deputies, rescue coordinators, and hospital administrators, yet one mystery remained untouched. No one could explain why Ethan had been abandoned on the mountain. No one knew why he had carried a notebook warning strangers not to trust the first rescue team. Captain Bennett quietly advised patience. "His story belongs to him," she said. "If he wakes up, he will decide when it is time to tell it." The hours passed with the gentle rhythm of hospital life. Wheelchairs rolled softly across polished floors. Monitors chimed beyond closed doors. Snow continued falling outside the tall windows, covering the city streets in the same quiet white that had nearly hidden 3 faithful souls forever. Shortly after midnight, a physician emerged from Ethan's room carrying a chart. His expression was no longer burdened with uncertainty. "He is responding," the doctor told Captain Bennett. "He is not awake yet, but his temperature is stabilizing, and his body is beginning to recover." Relief spread silently through everyone standing nearby. Olivia closed her eyes for a brief moment. Offering another prayer she had almost forgotten she still knew. Across the corridor, however, another quiet battle continued. Ghost remained asleep beneath warm blankets, while veterinary monitors traced the slow rhythm of his heartbeat. Rex lay only inches away from the glass enclosure, refusing food until one of the technicians finally carried a small blanket from Ethan's hospital bed and placed it beside him. The familiar scent changed everything. Rex rested his head upon the blanket and finally accepted a bowl of warm broth. Sometimes healing began with medicine. Sometimes it began with remembering that someone you loved was still close. Just before sunrise, the first rays of pale winter light filtered through the eastern windows, painting soft gold across the hospital corridor. A nurse entered Ethan's room to check his vital signs when she noticed something unusual. His right hand had moved beyond the blanket, fingers slowly searching across the mattress as though reaching for something that was no longer there. She gently called his name, Mr. Hayes. His eyelids fluttered once. Then again. After several long seconds, his blue-gray eyes opened only slightly, unfocused at first, before settling on the ceiling above him. The room remained quiet except for the steady rhythm of the cardiac monitor. The nurse smiled warmly. "Welcome back." Ethan struggled to speak, but only a whisper escaped. The first word was barely audible. "Dogs." She leaned closer. "They are alive," she answered immediately. "Both of them." Tears formed quietly in the corners of Ethan's eyes. He closed them again, not from weakness this time, but from relief too deep for words. Down the hall, almost at the exact same moment, Ghost slowly lifted his head from the veterinary bed for the first time. Rex was already standing before the movement was complete. Their eyes met across the small room, and Ghost gave one gentle thump of his tail against the blanket. The veterinary technician looked from one dog to the other and smiled through moist eyes. "I believe he felt it," she whispered. "Some bonds do not need voices. They simply know." Outside, the snow finally stopped falling, and for the first time since the storm began, a patch of clear blue sky appeared above the mountains where hope had refused to freeze. 3 days later, the hospital no longer echoed with urgency. Morning sunlight poured through wide windows, warming the quiet hallways with a gentle glow that felt almost like spring despite the snow still covering the streets outside. Ethan Hayes sat upright for the first time, wrapped in a navy blanket, the color slowly returning to his face. The deep exhaustion remained in his eyes, but so did something stronger: peace. Beside his bed rested two familiar shapes. Rex lay stretched across the floor with his head resting on Ethan's boot, while Ghost, still recovering but noticeably stronger, slept comfortably on a padded blanket beside the window where sunlight reached his aging muzzle. Olivia Carter stood near the doorway holding the weatherproof notebook she had recovered beneath the pine tree. She had waited until Ethan regained enough strength before mentioning it. When she finally placed it into his hands, he remained silent for several moments, gently running his fingers across the worn cover as though greeting an old friend. Then he smiled faintly. "I thought the mountain had taken this forever." Olivia quietly unfolded the handwritten warning she had found inside. "You expected someone to come looking," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Not for me." His eyes drifted toward Rex and Ghost. For what they knew, the room fell still. Outside the window, snow slid gently from the branches of nearby evergreens, sparkling beneath the winter sun. Ethan explained only what he could without breaking promises he had made during years of service. Before disappearing into the mountains, he had quietly documented evidence connected to a criminal smuggling operation using abandoned wilderness routes. The notebook contained location references and observations meant to protect innocent people if he never returned. He had hidden it where Rex could lead someone trustworthy if necessary. The dogs memorized the route better than any map, Ethan said with quiet admiration. "I prayed someone would understand what they were trying to say." Olivia looked toward Rex, who opened one sleepy eye before closing it again beneath Ethan's gentle hand. "He understood long before I did," she admitted with a smile. Captain Laura Bennett entered the room carrying news that seemed to lift an invisible weight from everyone's shoulders. Search teams had quietly verified the notebook's information, allowing investigators to safely locate the hidden evidence exactly where Ethan had recorded it. Several long-running investigations would finally move forward because one determined reporter had trusted an exhausted German shepherd instead of dismissing him as only a frightened animal. Bennett looked at Rex and Ghost with deep respect. "Sometimes the smallest witness tells the biggest truth," she said. Later that afternoon, Olivia stepped outside the hospital carrying her camera for the first time since the rescue. She reviewed the photographs stored inside. Snow-covered trees, a lonely ridge, a pair of amber eyes refusing to surrender. She realized none of the images truly explained what had happened on that mountain. The miracle had never been the rescue alone. It had been the quiet loyalty that survived long enough to guide Hope through the storm. She lowered the camera without taking another picture. Some moments deserved memory more than headlines. Upstairs, Ethan slowly reached down and rested one hand on Rex while the other found Ghost's warm shoulder. Neither dog stirred. They simply breathed together beneath the afternoon sunlight, three weary souls finally resting without fear, while beyond the window the mountains stood silent once more, keeping their secrets beneath a sky that had become brilliantly, mercifully blue. 1 year later, winter returned to the same Wyoming mountains with quieter winds and gentler snow, covering the ridges in a clean blanket of white that reflected the pale morning sun like polished glass. Olivia Carter stepped carefully along the familiar trail, carrying only a small backpack and the camera that had remained untouched for months. She had written many stories since that unforgettable rescue, yet none of them had ever fully captured what she witnessed on that lonely ridge. Newspapers could describe courage. They could document facts, but they struggled to explain the invisible thread that tied one faithful heart to another. At the crest of the hill, she stopped beside the weathered pine where the notebook had once rested beneath the snow. Someone had placed a simple wooden bench nearby, facing the valley below. There were no plaques celebrating heroes, no grand memorials, only a quiet place where travelers could sit and remember that hope sometimes arrived in the most unexpected form. Fresh footprints appeared farther down the trail. Olivia smiled before she even saw who had made them. Ethan Hayes emerged from the trees wearing a heavy winter jacket and carrying a walking stick carved from smooth mountain ash. The months had restored strength to his face, though the calm in his eyes revealed a different kind of healing, one that no physician could measure. Walking beside him were Rex and Ghost. Their coats had grown thick again for another mountain winter, and although Ghost's muzzle carried more silver than before, both German shepherds moved with the quiet confidence of old guardians who had already fulfilled the greatest mission of their lives. Ethan removed a pair of worn leather gloves and reached out to shake Olivia's hand. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between old friends needed no explanation. After a moment, Olivia looked toward the endless white valley stretching below. "I still think about that day," she admitted softly. Ethan nodded. "So do I." Rex wandered a few steps ahead before sitting exactly where Olivia had first seen him open his tired amber eyes through the snow. Ghost settled beside him, leaning gently against his lifelong companion. Ethan watched them with a quiet smile. "People always ask me how I survived." He paused, his gaze resting on the two faithful dogs. "I tell them the truth. I never faced that mountain alone." Olivia quietly lifted her camera one final time. This photograph was different from all the others. There were no flashing emergency lights, no fear, no uncertainty, only a man standing beside the two friends who had refused to leave him, surrounded by snow that no longer felt cold, but peaceful. She lowered the camera after a single picture, knowing it would never belong on the front page. Some memories were too sacred to become headlines. As the afternoon sun drifted lower behind the mountains, the three companions slowly turned toward the trail leading home. Their footprints stretched across the untouched snow before gradually fading into the distance beneath another light snowfall. Olivia remained on the ridge until they disappeared among the pines, listening as the quiet returned once more. She finally understood what the mountain had been trying to teach all along. Grace rarely arrives with applause. More often it comes on 4 steady paws, through silent faithfulness, gentle courage, and hearts that choose to stay when leaving would be easier. And long after every footprint disappears beneath fresh snow, that kind of love continues walking beside us, unseen but never truly gone.